Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPLA.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. Lots of stuff we're going to get into in a world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. Glad to be with you live from Port St. Lucie, Florida, as we take our yearly trip down to spring training. And obviously a lot of stuff going on. We're going to make sure we got the camera angle right. We'll find out in a little bit. If not, we'll end up adjusting ourselves. Looks like we're okay at this point, so glad to be with you as always. Just a reminder, if you're interested, you want to give the show a buzz, you could comment on a Facebook Live or Periscope feed. And obviously a day that we would normally spend talking a lot about baseball, but obviously the attention is drawn to what we've seen in a lot of the moves that have been made in the National Football League. And, you know, it stands out for a bunch of different reasons, because we talk about baseball, and obviously there's always the comparison between baseball and football. What is the national pastime and what isn't? You could have passionate fans about each one of the two sports, and as they sit there kind of going back and forth with each other, you know, could kind of be point to counterpoint. And it's pretty interesting to see, you know, both sports kind of growing to a point where the passionate fans, the ones that are the most passionate about each one of the particular sports, can kind of back up what they're saying by facts. And if you are a diehard NFL fan, if you are one of those fans out there that say that, you know, baseball, yeah, sure, it's been known as America's pastime, but has been passed up by the NFL. You've watched over the last week or so as we get ready for what is the beginning of the new calendar year, you know, quote in quotes, in the National Football League. We know, obviously, all these moves that are made, whether it's the trade of Joe Flacco to the Denver Broncos, which was announced over 2 weeks ago, to any of the things that you hear right now. The moves still are not official until the league season starts. But, you know, from a competitive standpoint, you're seeing a lot of teams jump in there and make themselves better, and make themselves more interesting, and make their chances to come and compete in this upcoming season a lot stronger than they were going in. You know, you look at what the Detroit Lions have done. Obviously, the Cleveland Browns making a trade for Odell Beckham Jr. and, you know, to pair him with Baker Mayfield. There's, you know, a lot of intrigue there. And of course, you know, being from the New York area, even though I'm in Florida this week, you know, you obviously understand the drastic moves and the feeling behind the Odell Beckham trade, because, you know, pretty similar to a lot of other interesting things in a world of sports, it's very polarizing. There are many fans of Odell Beckham, obviously one of the best football players in the entire sport, one of the best at his position, playing for a team in New York with the Giants that has their 4 Super Bowls, and the expectation is that they should be able to go out there and compete for another one. And a trade of Odell Beckham certainly puts a damper on the expectations for the New York Football Giants coming into the season next year. And it stands out because it could be a sign of what is to come for the New York Giants. Are they going to go the drastic route and rebuild? Or are they going to maybe pivot off of this and make a push to compete this year? And obviously we know one thing probably has something to do with the other, but, you know, may very well not. It may not have anything to do with the other. You obviously think about Eli Manning and whether he's coming back, and the Giants' decision coming up in regards to Manning. You know, they could cut him, and if they cut him, they'll save themselves a major cap hit, which they are right on the borderlines of having to deal with. And the Beckham trade could either enhance that move, maybe make it a little quicker, and then the Giants could go full-blown into their mode of rebuild, draft themselves a quarterback, draft themselves some younger players, obviously adding the number 17 overall pick in a draft. You know, having 2 first-round picks now gives them the flexibility to be able to add some youth in. Saving $5 million from the trade of Beckham gives them a little more cap space. The trade of Olivier Vernon to the Cleveland Browns, which, by the way, Vernon and Beckham are going to be teammates in Cleveland, which I think is very interesting. And that whole Cleveland Browns story will be very intriguing coming into this year, and certainly puts the Cleveland Browns at the top of the list of sleeper teams when we're making predictions, when it comes down a couple months from now and we're getting prepared for the National Football League season, which, by the way, you know, as quick as time goes by, And I know baseball season is right about to start. But next thing you know, we're going to be talking about the start of the National Football League season. We're going to be doing our own predictions. Fantasy baseball, yes, is about to get started, but right down the road is going to be fantasy football. With that, the start of another NFL season. And the Cleveland Browns right now are probably at the lead or in the lead when it comes to that team in the National Football League that's going to be the darlings of all the people in the media. All the media people are going to gravitate towards them and say, you know, it's going to be great to watch the Browns this year. They're going to be a sleeper team. They won 7 games last year. They looked good under their new coach in Greg Williams, which we know Greg Williams is now with the Jets as the defensive coordinator. You know, Freddie Kitchens is taking over as the head coach. Baker Mayfield's there as a quarterback. You know, what type of better weapon would you want to see Baker Mayfield get other than Odell Beckham Jr.? If you're a Baker Mayfield fan, you got to be excited. If you own him in fantasy football, maybe have the opportunity to keep him next year on one of your teams, you got to be excited because he's going to be throwing the ball to Odell Beckham Jr. But you look at a series of moves that have been made in the National Football League, one of them kind of stands out to me, and I saw a little bit of a pattern with this. And if you're a Jets fan, and just remember, when it comes to football, I don't come with any biasness. I root for the Tennessee Titans, but I do it in a very quiet type of way. I don't sit here and say, hey, you know, I'm totally biased when it comes to what I'd call my favorite team. And we'll talk about the word we in a couple minutes. But, you know, when it comes to local teams, at least in the New York area, I have no biasness one way or the other. And you watch the Jets as they had the opportunity or looked like they had an agreement with Barr, the linebacker from the Minnesota Vikings, only for him to rip up the deal and end up re-signing with the Vikings. And you know, about 365 days ago, you jump into the DeLorean, you clock it back up to 88 miles an hour, and you go back to exactly where we were at this time last year, and it was Kirk Cousins pretty much using the New York Jets as leverage to get the bigger deal or the better deal with the Minnesota Vikings. Now, if you didn't know then what was going to happen now, and obviously with the NFL draft and the Jets drafting Sam Darnold, number 3 overall, moving up after making a trade with the Indianapolis Colts last year, you know that maybe the Jets ended up doing a better thing. Kirk Cousins had a terrible year last year, and you know, hope is, at least if you're a Vikings fan or if you support football in the north, you know, in the northern part of this country, you hope that Kirk Cousins could have a better year than he did last year. If not, it looks like the Jets dodged a major bullet by not making this, you know, acquisition. So they end up, you know, having it almost happen to them again. A Minnesota player using the Jets as leverage to sign a deal or maybe a better deal with the Minnesota Vikings. Now you wonder if that's going to cause bad blood between the Jets and the Vikings. Now, it could be a coincidence. It could be a situation last year where Kirk Cousins maybe, you know, was looking for what the best offer was going to be and thought it was with the Jets, and then the Vikings swooped in and made him a better deal. But now you have it happen twice. 2 players that were almost in agreement. Now, this agreement with the linebacker, what looks like it was a little more definite. It looked like it was some signing on a paper, or at least an agreement that was in place to kind of move on through physicals and announce this player as part of your team. So if this player was able to have an agreement with the Jets, whether it was verbal or written, and it takes that offer back to the Vikings and says, hey, can you beat this or can you not beat this? Then I think that is negotiating with a little bit of bad faith. And that's something that I think we want to make sure in sports and in life, that when negotiations are taking place, they are made with the best of intentions. Negotiations between a player and a team are about the team's interest and also about the player's interest in being involved and being part of that respective team. And if they're not, then that player and that agent should not use that as leverage to try to get themselves a better deal elsewhere. I think they should be upfront and honest. And if a team is going to go out of their way to try to sign a player and try to make an offer, they should be more transparent and honest when it comes to what their interest and what their opinions and what they feel about a particular organization are. So there's a lot of, obviously this is maybe a little bit of a stretch from my part. Maybe this is a little bit of an assumption that the two players in question were not necessarily negotiating in good faith with the New York Jets, but it obviously led to the Jets essentially putting a deadline on the negotiations with Le'Veon Bell. And it looks like Le'Veon Bell has come to an agreement with the Jets. It looks like he's going to take the 4-year offer that the Jets have out there. But if I'm the New York Jets, I have a little bit of fear that my team and my organization is not being respected. And with that, players and agents are going to use the Jets and the money that they're willing to throw out there as leverage to, increase the price of a player going somewhere else. And that shouldn't happen in sports. And we realize that we think about the free agency in Major League Baseball, Manny Machado with the San Diego Padres, Manny Machado with the Chicago White Sox. Teams that maybe on the surface may not be looked at as legitimate contenders right now, but also may not be looked at as teams that are on the rise right now or realistically would be willing to throw out that kind of money for a free agent like a Machado or a Bryce Harper. And maybe those teams end up getting used as time ends up going by. And if that's the case, that's unfortunate. Because you want to feel from a competition level in sports that every team is on the same playing field. Now, talent certainly changes that. If there's a team that has a lot more talent, if there's a team that is a lot closer to winning a championship in any respective sport, you understand that that's what teams are judged by. So when I do my 30-1 MLB countdown previews every year, I'm ranking the team that is the most equipped to win a World Series championship and the 30th team that is least equipped to win a World Series championship. Now, I don't look at demographics. I don't look at market size when I'm judging the strength of a certain ball club. But when you look at it, it gets judged like that. And sometimes free agents, whether they are, unrestricted, or whether they're players with agents that are negotiating the potential trade to a different franchise, they're going to judge organizations based off of their history, based off of their market size. And because of that, you end up with situations where players and agents could possibly use a less respected team or a smaller market team as leverage to end up getting what it is that they want. And I have a question with that because you're talking about negotiating in bad faith. And when teams do it, we're certainly there to capitalize. We're certainly there to say, hey, all you're doing is just throwing money out there saying, hey, we got more money than anybody else, so you're going to want to play here because all the players are interested in is money. Is that necessarily negotiating in good faith? Is it? Probably not. But when players and agents do it from the other side, it doesn't get brought up as much. So I think there is bad faith that's being negotiated when it comes to organizations and teams, but also players and agents. This copyright and broadcast is authorized under internet rights granted by the World Wide Web and is solely for your entertainment of our audience. Any publication, reproduction, or other use of the pictures, descriptions, and accounts of this show without the express written consent of the Passball Show, JohnPLA.com, and John PLA LLC is prohibited. Any commercial or other use of the program, such as by charging admission for its showing, is similarly prohibited. So I take the word we and understand that fans in the world of sports, myself included, all of us, no matter what it is that we do, whether people have a job to do that is associated with the world of sports, it doesn't restrict them from having any sort of fandom and support for any particular team. And anybody that is a sports fan, you figure one of the first characteristics of being a sports fan would be a fan of a particular team in a particular sport. And once again, I'm going to preface everything I'm about to say by saying there's nothing wrong with that. Fans should be considered part of the team. Fans should be respected for the amount of support that they give towards a respective team. Fans go to the games. Fans buy merchandise. Fans do a lot of different things that, are both financial, but most of all, emotional, and from a mental standpoint in regards to the support of any one of their respective teams. So the teams will obviously always look at their fans and say thank you to the fans. We appreciate the fans. Fans up to a certain point, because of the contributions financially, contribute to the paying of player salary. I think it's a little bit of a stretch when people say that fans pay the salary. The owners pay the salary. The owners who run their business, yes, get a certain amount of income when it comes to what the fans contribute, season ticket holders and their purchase of the tickets, and even a regular fan that goes to 1-2 games a year and buys some merchandise has some sort of contribution when it comes to the paying of players and the operations of a franchise. So don't let it be thought that there is a disrespect intended to the fans. That being said, there's a couple of different things here that have to be spoken about. You could say, hey, this is my team. This is the team I support. Fans say that all the time. And players and people associated with those respective teams appreciate that. They do. And they say, hey, we do it for the fans. The fans consider themselves a part of the team. But there is a line that exists out there that you cross, and you almost make it sound disrespectful when you say, hey, this is what we do as a franchise. Now, we could have a little bit of a debate over where that line exists. Maybe I may consider that line a little bit closer to, the couple steps that you take, as opposed to you who may feel that line is a lot further. You may have to walk a country mile to get there. But when we use the word we to describe our own teams, we have to understand a couple things. We are not a member of that particular organization. We are not getting paid by that organization. When it comes down to it, if you reverse it, that organization doesn't consider us a part of it. As a fan, you support the team. That's fine. But you're not involved in the structure of the franchise. The franchise could, put itself in a great position to win or in a lousy position to lose without any of our input. As the fan, you have no say. So if you're part of a franchise that ends up doing very well, the New England Patriots winning their 6th Super Bowl in the last couple decades, yeah, sure, you want to embrace that. You want to be there at the parade. You want to put up, your fandom in any sort of way, whether it's tattoos on your skin or posters up at your house or bumper stickers or jerseys that you wear. That's fine. But you got to understand that the fans, yes, you're there to cheer, but you didn't do anything to contribute to that team doing what it did. That team won in spite of your input. The fact that you cheered really loud or you went to one extra game or you bought that extra jersey is not the difference between that team winning a championship and not winning a championship. So we use the word we, and sometimes we don't use it in a insulting type of way, but we got to understand that it can be insulting. It can be disrespectful to a team that actually invests in the operations of its own organization. A team that, invests a lot of money, a lot of willpower, a lot of staff, makes very important decisions that are made for the best of the organization. And sometimes it's not always right away. You look at what the Houston Astros did at the beginning of the 2010s when they decided to rebuild their franchise down to nothing. New York Football Giants fans may feel that the Giants are on their way to the same thing with a similar type of rebuild. Sometimes those decisions don't have the fans' heart in mind. The Astros fans of the early 2010s had to bear something that was kind of ugly. It was a situation where the team was not putting a product on the field, but the investment was made in the front office. You wonder if those same fans that were disgusted back then are the same ones that are saying we when it comes to the Astros World Series championship of 2017. It's interesting to think about where exactly is the line, or where is the barometer that should be set to where you consider yourself a fan of the team, but where does it go overboard when you start mentioning them in passing as being part of the team? And I do think that there is a line there, and that line, once it's crossed, is a major disrespect for that organization and that team that you respectfully support. And sometimes it's not done in a mean way. Sometimes it's not done to be devious. Sometimes it's not done to be disrespectful. But the thing that has to be pointed out is that when you cross that line and you start to mention yourself in the same breath as the team that you support, sometimes there's a line that gets crossed there. Just a reminder that Castrol provides maximum protection against viscosity and thermal breakdown. This is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPLA.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. We are sitting here in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and I'll give I guess an unsolicited plug, but a respectful plug to the family vacation homes of Port St. Lucie, and actually have rental properties available, different houses and villas and townhomes that you could rent for a couple days at a time. If you're planning your next trip out to Port St. Lucie, I'd recommend it. You know, located right by the Hilton Garden Inn in PGA Village here in Port St. Lucie, Florida. An outstanding job, and listen, they got a lot of things available. You could get different house sizes, but the interesting thing about it and what drew me to it is the fact that the cost per day is right up there with any of the hotels that you could book at this time. So why not, the next time you're heading out to Port St. Lucie, Florida, invest yourself in a family vacation home rental for a couple days instead of staying at a hotel room. So as we're sitting here in Port St. Lucie, Florida, you're thinking spring training, you're thinking baseball getting about ready to get started in a couple weeks. And you start to look for different things, and I bring stuff up like this because it's a little silly, and sometimes it's mundane, sometimes it's stuff that you just don't expect people to want to talk about on a given show. But when I'm watching a game, especially when you're watching a spring training game, there's a lot of monotony involved there. There's regular players that are going to play up to a certain point, and once the game gets to the 5th inning or the 6th inning, there's going to be a bunch of minor league players, and this will exist almost all the way up until the start of spring training. Of course, you have cuts. There's going to be less players in major league camp, so you're going to start to see, as you get closer to the start of the beginning of the season and the end of spring training, more players that are either on the bubble of making a team or players that could be expected to be on a roster once the season starts. So I try to look a little deeper in it, and remember, it was about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe even longer, might be 6, 7, 8 years ago, when I saw a player come up as a pinch hitter and hit a home run, and that team ends up batting around. The player comes up for the second time in the inning and hits a home run again, and the inning ends, and that player does not go on the field the next inning. So a player came up as a pinch hitter, had 2 at-bats as a pinch hitter in the same inning, which, by the way, doesn't happen very often. And it doesn't happen very often that a player gets 2 pinch hitting opportunities in a single inning and doesn't remain in the game. So that's your rare occurrence number 1. But for the player to go up there both times and hit 2 home runs and then sit back on the bench, not go out on the field in the next inning, is very interesting. It's one of those things that if you're a baseball nerd, you're gravitated towards stuff like that. And I saw another one happen in yesterday's game between the Mets and the Marlins in Jupiter. The Miami Marlins end up coming up with a series of hits, some of them kind of fluky, off of Mets reliever Tyler Batchelor, a bunch of singles. And it turns out they get 5 straight hits, the last of whom resulted in a runner scoring. A ball is cut off, the throw to home plate, and the throw was made to second, and that player trying to advance to second base on the throw home is thrown out, and the inning is over. Next inning, Marlins come up, 2 straight hits. So what happened is you talk about 7 consecutive hits over the course of 2 innings. Probably something you're not going to see in baseball too often. And I wonder, for those historians and those researchers out there, maybe we could look to see how many times that has happened over the course of baseball history and in a regular major league game. In other words, was there 8 straight hits in 1 inning, with the last one resulting in a 3rd out being made, and the next inning start off with 4 or 5? What's the most consecutive hits or the most consecutive base runners over the course of 2 innings in baseball history? I'm going to look that up. Now, there's a tremendous story out there that really isn't getting a lot of respect when it comes to Major League Baseball, and maybe it's just the fact that it's not getting enough recognition. Maybe it's just not out there as much. Maybe as we look at it, we're not giving it respect because not enough people may necessarily know about what this player is doing. But we talked a couple weeks ago about the possibility of human trafficking, which we know exists out there, and we know it's really just an ugly and disgusting thing that we see, and something that when it comes down to it, you would like for it to be eliminated. And it's not as easy said than done. But Detroit Tigers pitcher Matt Boyd has taken a stand against human trafficking. And you find that a lot of times this happens, or these people or these children and these mostly women are abducted and trained into lives of sex slavery, not just in their native countries, but also here in the United States and other countries all across the world. And Matt Boyd has decided he's going to do something about it. And a lot of players, when it comes down to the world of sports, throw their support when it comes to finances, throw support when it comes to their money and say, hey, we're going to donate towards this cause. Matt Boyd did something that many athletes have not done, and many people in the spotlight have not done. He went out there and adopted 36 girls to take them away from the possibility of them being trafficked and used as sex slaves. To basically take them, adopt them, and bring them in as part of his family is outstanding. And if I didn't use a part of my show to discuss something like this, I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job. It's a story that needs to go out there and be duplicated many times. And we say all the time when it comes to life, there's things that we would do if we had money. And there's also risks that are involved in everything. But we tend to overlook the fact of simply doing the best thing possible. And the best thing possible in this situation is to save 36 girls in a country of Uganda from being abducted and used in human trafficking rings as sex slaves. And it's something that you can't respect enough. It's something that you can't throw the kudos out for a man and his wife to go out there and use their life as a platform to save other lives. And anybody that has a daughter, anybody that has children, can probably think of one of the worst things that could happen. Would their child be abducted or stolen from them? And that can happen in this country. You turn on the news, there's missing persons all the time. Some of them are taken, and girls are taken with the intention of being used as sex slaves. And their lives are never the same. Even if they end up being used for a little while, and then they come back and they return to their life with their family, it's a life that they're never going to be able to forget. Just like a little girl or a little boy that's molested at a young age. If this happens, this is something that has ramifications on the rest of their lives. And even if they are receiving the proper treatment and support and love, they're never going to be the same again. And we think of a life being a terrible thing to waste. And a lot of times we apply this to life or death. Sure, if somebody dies, you think of it as a wasted life. But what about lives that are impacted in such a way that they're never going to be the same? And you wonder, that life that's being lived, is that actually life itself? So kudos to Matt Boyd and his wife. Outstanding job adopting these kids from Uganda. And you wonder if there can be platforms set up out there for others to be able to do the same thing. For others to be able to save lives. And children that are in spots where maybe they don't have parents. Maybe they're living in homes that are very, you could worry about them being broken into or the kids be stolen from. If more parents stepped up and adopted children that were in these high-risk situations, we may be able to get closer to the end of sex slavery and be able to get to the end of children being abducted to be used in human trafficking rings. Just a reminder that this is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no brand produced by any other brewer that costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood aging produces a taste, a smoothness, and drinkability you'll find in no beer at any cost. So the last part of the program we're going to get into today, and we'll throw this out there with the music, the Nobody's Listening segment of the program. We always start by thanking everybody who has taken the time to listen to the show today. Once again, this is the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPLA.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey, available on iTunes, Google Play, on demand on YouTube. And I do want to thank everybody who has taken the time to listen and watch my YouTube videos. We're hoping to get to a point where maybe we talk about something that is polarizing enough, something to a point where maybe it could go viral and we could get the name and the words and everything out there and be something that we just want to be. We want to be a platform for the people, for the average and ordinary people, to go out there and communicate and be able to do something and have a say and feel like things that they say matter. And today's nobody listening topic is something that is, I don't think it's very minor, but anybody that's gone out there to rent a car has been in a spot where you think about the possibility of the risk that's involved in renting a car. The worst thing that could happen is you could be out on a vacation and, God forbid, be involved in an accident with a rental car. And it's happened before. I'm sure there's many people that are watching or listening that have experienced an accident involving a rental car. But we always think about it, and does it make sense to make sure your car is insured through the place that you're renting the car from, as opposed to using your own insurance? Now, anybody that has a car or anybody that has drive, I would assume, has some sort of auto protection when it comes to their own car. And the one question that I would ask them, if you rent on a regular basis, do you have any sort of communication with your auto insurance company? Do you ask them, you say, hey, does it make sense for me to get additional insurance or insure my car when I'm renting it? Because I think that could be, depending on the matter of opinion that you have, a scam or maybe not a scam. Maybe it's done with the intention of rental car companies getting a chance, right, to collect extra money for you. Now, I understand the price for insurance when it comes to renting a car isn't much. It's usually an extra $20 or it's an extra $30. But if you times that by the amount of people that end up taking it, that's a certain profit that exists and goes to that respective car rental company. And I just wonder, and that's something that I think should be discussed at some point. Does it make sense to get additional insurance on the car that you're renting when you are, as a driver, covered by your own auto insurance company? Little recap of the show today, the NFL. And I tell you, this particular free agent signing / trade / beginning of the fiscal NFL season, I guess, when you talk in whatever it is, the 15th or the 14th, when the league year actually starts, has been more intriguing and more interesting than we've seen in many other years. From the trades of Antonio Brown to Odell Beckham to different signings such as Cameron Wake signing with the Tennessee Titans. They got the offensive lineman for the St. Louis Rams. There's been so much more player movement this year than we've seen in other years. And you think about baseball when it comes to the winter meetings, when you see that executives and people from all over the baseball industry get together in one respective area. General managers a month or so before that all get together in one particular spot. You'd expect to see a lot more action when it comes to Major League Baseball and its offseason. So has the NFL passed that with the amount of transactions and the amount of movement that we've seen in this particular season? Because one of the things we talked about in baseball is teams don't seem to be as willing to add that impact player or pay that amount of money that you would expect to get that type of player that could put them over the top. Some of it has to do with analytics. Some of it has to do with different type of executives that have different sort of philosophies. But let's understand that the thought of just throwing money out there in sports is never considered the right way to go. It's never considered to be the way to build a franchise. It's something that has been known for a very long time. So the thought that all executives in Major League Baseball and owners have finally grown to that point to understand that you don't need money to build a winner, I think is a little bit of baloney. But if you look at what's happened in the NFL and the amount of transactions and the amount of movement, you're starting to see a change. And you're starting to see football take over, and maybe there's 32 teams in the National Football League that think of themselves as legitimate playoff contenders as opposed to what? Only about 15 or 20 out of the 30 teams in Major League Baseball? And that's a problem. And we look at the NBA, there's about 5 or 6 teams, or maybe even more, that come into each season. And obviously those teams change based on their personnel. Those teams change based off of the expectations that they have from one year to another. But there's a lot of teams in the NBA that come into a season knowing that there's no expectations, knowing that they're not going to get the support from the ownership or the general manager, that they've decided that this is just not their season. But you look at the teams in the National Football League, and there may be a handful that you say, hey, they may be in for a rough 2019-2020 season. That being said, you got to be excited for the National Football League because parity exists in football that doesn't exist in baseball, that doesn't exist in basketball, and even up to a certain extent does not exist in hockey. The word we, listen, I don't have any problem with using that as a fan. We are supporting of our favorite teams, no matter who it is that you support. You consider yourself a part, a small part, but a part of that franchise. And you root for them and you cheer them on and you support them financially with the buying of tickets and the purchasing of merchandise and maybe bringing your kids up to be a fan of. But sometimes we take that word and we almost make it as if we are on the payroll of that particular team. Maybe giving ourselves credit for moves that are made by a franchise and decisions that are made that have nothing to do with what we feel. And those decisions will be made whether we agreed with them or disagreed with them. And all you have to do is look at the many teams that end up going towards the tanking mode. They obviously aren't doing it with the support of the majority of their fans. They're certainly not doing it with the support of their season ticket holders and the fans that they expect to spend, a lot of money on game tickets and merchandise and stuff like that. So that team will take your support and flush it right down the toilet in a blink of an eye. At the same time, it is disrespectful when you use the word we to describe what your team has done. And I do think there's a line to be crossed. The line could be considered a little bit closer to where I stand to where you stand. You may feel that line could be crossed a little bit further. Matthew Boyd, outstanding job adopting 36 girls in Uganda, hopefully keeping them away from human trafficking and sex slave rings. We'll be back with you later on in the week. Hope everybody enjoys their week. Hopefully we'll be able to get some stuff from Port St. Lucie, Florida. We're going to pursue some interviews. We're also going to provide some analysis of stuff going on in the Grapefruit League in Major League Baseball. Be back with you later on in the week. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.